Hello, my name is Gerry, and I'm of Statliam descent. And I tell people I'm a Statliam immigrant into Coast Salish territory, and I've been living here since 1995. So I come from a very small community called Seaton Lake or Shalath, which is on the other side of Whistler. In 1976, I started working in addictions in my own community, and from there I moved to working in a treatment center. And from there, started working for other agencies and communities, and what I call human service work, or what people call human service work, working with people that are suffering. One of my notable jobs that I'd like to mention is working for the residential school project, and I worked there for 13 years, and I traveled all over the country, United States and Canada, talking about the impacts of this experience on individuals, families, and communities. Well, residential schools were started as an assimilation policy by the government of Canada to assimilate the Indigenous peoples in this country into Canadian society. They identified us as a problem, so it is part of the solution was to, even though it was about assimilation, the oxymoron in this is that they segregated us. So I went to residential school, and I was going to school with Indigenous people from different parts of the province. And we're all together, and we're going to school in this institution, and it was had a profound effect on people that attended there. And there's generations of people that attended these institutions. And the first ones. Like my mother was the first one in my family that attended, and I tell people she was put through English immersion with violence, because that's all she spoke was her own language when she went to residential school as a little girl, and it's all she knew was Statliam. And she went through this experience, and she told me about it, and in 1993 she told me, and it was years and years later. I was already a man when she told me. And I hadn't realized what she had gone through. She was telling me about the beatings, and one of the things she told was they'd put uncooked rice on the floor and make them kneel on it and hold Bibles out like this if they were caught speaking their language. And I look at my mom, and I'm thinking of her as a little girl. And she was saying they'd go so far as to shave people's heads if they kept speaking their language. And I thought, that's all they knew. How can they speak anything else? And the last thing she told me was that one of the final punishments was to stick a needle through their tongue if they got caught again. At that moment, I forgave my mother, because as a Statliam person, I did not know the language. And she told me that her and my dad had agreed not to teach us because they knew I was going to go to residential school. And I realized they were saving me at that time from going through that punishment. It was an incredible experience of me for forgiving my own parents because I resented them for not teaching me. And when I understood, I said, I forgive you for not teaching me the language. So that is part of the plan of the government and the churches of the day, was to assimilate us, because they could. I keep trying to find ways of telling people this is all about resources. In Canada, it's about land and it's about resources, and we are identified as a problem because we wander these vast tracts of land, berry picking, hunting, medicine picking. We occupied vast tracts of land and lived off it. It was our garden. So they segregated us, and they put us in these small clumps of what is usually the worst parts of the land in our territory, and made them into reservations. And after they set up the reservations, they set up the residential school. Then they took the children. And it was an assimilation policy. And it was very effective, because our languages are endangered today because of that experience. Well, before residential school, it was truly a preparation for life. It was to make sure we achieve our potential. They had teachings and knowledge how to accomplish this, and how to talk to a child, for instance, how to teach a child about respect, not for themselves, and also for other human beings and for everything else on the land, which would include insects, fish, deer, whatever is around them, to have that respect. And they would teach them that so they could have a life after. They could coexist with other life forms in a respectful manner, so it would be always there for them. And that was the job of the parent, to teach them. And also, at times they knew when to call in other teachers. Because all human beings, as we grow, we start to get distant from our parents. And sometimes we don't listen to them. So they knew this, so they would call in and they would have people, and they'd sit all the children down, like say in this clan, and they'd have someone come to talk to them about the value of work, or recreation, or rest, or diet, or they would teach them these life skills and prepare them eventually for self-reliance. But the beautiful part of this old system was they were self-reliant, but they were still connected to each other. They're still a unit. They were still part of the circle. And they were taught to help each other, and to be fair. That's when I look back and I remember the stories I was told about that reflected this way of life. Well, the big event that happened there was a disconnect. All of a sudden, like, for instance, I was in a residential school and I'm away from my parents. We were disconnected, for 10 months a year. And when I went home, it's just like something magic happened and we couldn't connect. It just didn't happen. It's not we couldn't, we wouldn't, or whatever. For whatever reason, there was no connection again. So it's just like being in isolation, even though you're surrounded by people. And I've heard this so often from survivors saying that, the biggest lack that I have, or my regret, is that there was no affection from my parents. Like physical, literally hugging and holding each other. That somehow disappeared. And I say it's like a magical event because I know I went through that. I experienced that with my mother. And my children experienced it from me. That whole idea of being connected, being one with each other. I think that's been one of the biggest losses, because that I compare it a failure to thrive, because you're missing something that all human beings love. You love attention, you love affection. So when it's not there, something happens to people, they become like thick-skinned, and it's like not caring about people, and this is happening to children. So of course when you grow up that way, it's hard to get it when you become an adult. Hard to do it, to express gratitude or affection. Well, the characteristic of the school was you're brought in, you're given a number, and you're given an identity, because we all wore the same kind of clothes, same color shirt, pants, undergarments, shoes, and they all have a number on there. And you're put into your cohort. Like there's junior boys, intermediate boys, and senior boys, so we're put into our age groups. And you're ruled with an iron fist. It's like a paramilitary institution. Like our beds were all made perfectly tight. Like you could bounce a quarter on there, and And if it wasn't made properly, it was ripped apart and you have to do it again. So as little boys, we're learning how to do all of this and living in this rigid atmosphere. So it's a fear-based atmosphere as well, because if you don't, you're going to be humiliated by being strapped in front of everybody, or hollered at, so you're growing up basically in fear that you're going to make a mistake. And when you make a mistake, you're punished quite harshly, so it's the characteristic, the word comes from a word character, which means a sharp-edged line. So that etched line, how I was marked by that experience was I didn't know how to be with people. I was with people, but how to be myself, seemed to be lost. Because when to wake up, how to wake up, how to dress, when to go for meals, how to eat, everything was done. We're lined up and we're literally marched to different things like to school after, so we're institutionalized. And that has had a profound effect because when you're institutionalized, you wait for someone to tell you what to do. So you lose that creativity and that naturalness that people have because you're waiting. That's, when I think of that experience of growing up that way, I have many regrets from it. I lost part of my natural being at that place. And it's, when you live in fear and anxiety, it does something to you, and that's the way I grew up, afraid to make mistakes, and not ever wanting to make a mistake, because I'm going to be humiliated. Even if the teacher wasn't going to humiliate me, I still had that fear. And I even carried that fear after I left there, It becomes ingrained. Well, the classroom, I remember the classroom is, I was talking a little earlier about the fear of making mistakes. That's where we'd most often be struck, was in the classroom. With rulers, I remember they had these dividers where they would be made out of quite thick wood, and they'd have a chalk in there for making diagrams on the blackboard. Sometimes we'd get hit with those, if we make a mistake, or some of the teachers would throw chalk at us, or erasers and things, but usually it was done, you'd have to go in front of everyone and receive your punishment. So I remember as a child, I'd literally get dizzy in class because my breathing would be so controlled, so shallow, because I'm afraid they're going to ask me and I'm going to make a mistake. That's my own personal experience. I haven't talked to others that have gone through with me if they were going through the same thing. Because if we'd see violence, I could remember one of my fellow students was dragged out of the class and we knew he was being punched and struck. And he comes back, he's got blood trickling out of his nose, and we're looking at him. And he's humiliated, he's beaten. And we're afraid that's going to happen to us too. So I grew up in fear of education. That's a big difference. I wasn't celebrating knowledge. I was afraid of making mistakes. That's what I received from the experience. Like it didn't bring the best out of me. In traditional teaching and education, the best is brought out of you and is celebrated. Doesn't matter if you're better than others. It wasn't what it is about. It is being yourself. And in this system, it is fear. It is a fear-based system. First off, I supported survivors that were going to criminal and civil court for sexual abuse in a residential school. And so I'd support them in the civil process, where they're going for examinations for discovery, and I'd hear about their lives before residential school, during residential school, and after when they left. And also I'd go to the court when they went to court, and I'd sit with them and stand with them and support them. So I'd done that for 3 years. And I shaved my head twice in those 3 years out of protest and support and grieving, because I'd hear the most terrible things that happened to young girls and boys sexual abuse in the system. It was just horrendous. There's so many mistakes that are made that dehumanize people because they don't understand. I believe if they understand, because what they hear about Indigenous people today are what they hear in the news usually. And the news goes after negativity. It doesn't celebrate success. TV, newsprint, it's all about finding out what's bad and what's wrong with the politicians, with nature, the economy or whatever. That's what news is about, and that's what people get. It's so easy to stereotype if you don't understand. Oh, they're all drunks, they're all stupid, they're all lazy, or whatever, that was fed to you. If you understand what happened, then you can help people to be free, just by treating them as humans, because it's so easy to stereotype when it's all you grow up and that's all you know. I talk to a lot of medical staff in this province, and I tell them, you allow yourself to really know an Indigenous person, you're going to find out that a lot of them are very generous and got a good sense of humor, and they will give you the shirt off their back if you do make a connection with them. Because we all know, we walk into a room that some people have doubts about us, we all know that. We can pick up the energy. Every one of us can. So it's important for them to understand so they can take proper action and how to assist people that have been oppressed and marginalized intergenerationally, because we have been. I think our people always have reconciled. Otherwise we would have been terrorists. And we're waiting for the other side to do something. For us, like we're saying, what did we do wrong? Why do we have to reconcile? Because reconcile means to repair a relationship. And it's natural for us to say, what did we do wrong? Because we did not set up the reservation, we didn't ask for it. We did not set up the residential schools, and we did not ask for it. Because the reservations took us off the land. So it's difficult for us to say we want to reconcile with you, Canada, and Canada is saying yes, and they just want it to be words. That's what makes it difficult for so many. I've heard survivors like my cohorts say, Gerry, what did we do wrong? Why do we have to reconcile? What did we do wrong? And some of them were quite angry. One of my cousins, his arm got damaged in the school. And they put him in a boxing club because he was a good boxer, but they never fixed his arm. So when he left there, he couldn't raise his arm above a certain level. So he had permanent physical damage because of the residential school. And he was angry, and he says, what did I do wrong, Gerry, that I have to reconcile with him? And I had a hard time to answer him. I'm saying, well, if we learn how to make up with people, our children will learn. But I sort of agree with him. I'm saying, what did I do wrong that I have to reconcile? So it's been a difficult one for me, and I know that we need peace between each other, but I can't see what we've done wrong myself. Like these things were put on us. Like I tell people, I didn't ask to be raised a Roman Catholic. My parents didn't ask, my grandparents didn't ask, my great-grandfather never asked. They just showed up and said, you're going to be this, And that's part of the marginalization that happened to us, Being a survivor myself, I didn't know how I was going to feel when I heard it. But as we were listening, where I'm in this room full of residential school survivors, and I'd see some of them hanging on to each other, weeping, as this apology's happening. And it wasn't until I heard Harper say, you've been carrying this by yourself far too long, that I got moved to tears, because I had been carrying this for all my life, the abuse at the residential school. And I was in the process of putting it down already, but to hear him saying that, and I knew that it was true for so many survivors. We carry it by ourselves. We don't share what happened to us at the school. We just carry it, and we internalize it. And it becomes part of our muscle mass and our way of thinking after. So many of my cohort suicided or died violent death. And I thought about them when I was listening. And my late sister, she went too. And I was saying, part of me was angry. Part of me felt some relief. Finally, someone's acknowledging this publicly, that terrible things happened. He says, you had a vibrant culture and way of life, and we took it from you. And I know that's true. And after I was waiting for, okay, what's going to happen now? Is it just going to be good words hanging in the air? I used to work downtown east side when I was working for a residential school project. And I go down there once a week. And after the apology, I go down there, maybe a month later, and I would see the people. And when I was down there, the majority of people I worked with were sexually abused at their residential school or in foster homes. These are indigenous street people. And I was down there one week, and I listened to these stories, and I look at these people. They're wasting away from HIV or just drug use or alcohol. And I remember my energy had gone down at that point, and I was saying, F the apology. Now, what is that? And I had to pick myself up again, say, no, we are going to change, we are changing, and we need to do it. Because there was a part about the apology that said responsibility too. And I knew then that we have a responsibility as part of our healing, as well as the ones that put this on us. They have a responsibility too, but we both must remember our responsibility.